This is Lynn Baber. Today's article, because I'm talking today's article instead of writing today's article, is about getting back to the basics and how important it is that wherever it is that we start, that each step goes in the right direction. And the big problem that happens if the first step is in the wrong direction. And there's two things I want to bring to your attention today and kind of draw a parallel between them. The first is with the very beginning of the Bible. In the beginning, this is where we begin at Genesis 1:1. And I believe that if you get Genesis chapters 1 through 3 wrong, you're really going to have trouble with the rest of the book as far as nailing exactly what the message is God has for us and understanding it as a whole. But I want to go to something that I know as a horse professional and introduce that to you. And that's the concept of the atlas. The atlas is the first pivot point. It's the first place where you have to make a decision in where you go, because you have the horse's skull, and the skull doesn't have anything that moves. It has a jaw, but there's no skull bone that actually moves. And then you have the atlas, which is the first cervical vertebrae, and it inserts into the skull. Now, the thing that most people don't know is that only goes back and forth. It's strictly on one plane. It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down, and it does not rotate. Now, when you see a horse turn its head around and the ears go out of parallel, okay, this would be parallel. This is out of parallel. What's happened is that very first connection didn't get the message. You can't make a twist there, which means the twist has to happen somewhere further down the cervical vertebral column. And what that means is you have a tweak. You have something it's an unbroken connection, because the beginning of it, and then wherever your tweak happens, and then the other side, they're not playing the same game. And when you have a horse that first connection is not part of every other connection, at some point you're going to end up with a lameness, an unsoundness, or a training problem that's just going to drive you nuts because you don't know what's causing it. And a lot of the times the problem is way back there in the beginning, when you got off track between the skull and the first cervical vertebra. You were setting yourself up for failure. And the reason that happens is because the body has to find some way to compensate. Something gets pushed too far one way, something is not pushed far enough someplace else, and eventually those tensions can't be strong enough to deliver what you're looking for. So I know that to be true. Now my hypothesis about Genesis 1 through Genesis 3. There's two ways that we approach God words in general. I mean, that's the two ends of the continuum. But what we either do is we bring our understanding, what we know, what we've learned, our doctrine, and we bring that to God's word, and then we take God's word and fit it into the pigeonholes of what we already know. And that's the way most people do it. But that's the same thing as the atlas trying to twist. It cannot do it. The proper way, and I'm just going to say this, the way to really be in connection with the Lord, the way I want to be, is to go to God's word first. That's the beginning. And then to take that word and use that as the framework. And then take everything else that I know, facts, ideas, doctrine, whatever I learned in school, what I read, what people's opinions are, what my opinions are, and I make sure that those fit into God's word. Otherwise, it's backwards. So when you begin with in the beginning, we learn from the very first word of the very first verse what God did, how he explained it, how he identifies himself, how he puts himself in relationship to the creation, and we have to move from that. If you're someone who thinks there's really something about evolution, that God didn't really do it the way the Bible said, that that's really a story and that's just something that, men later wrote out to explain it, you are on the wrong path. That atlas and first cervical vertebrae is so twisted. There's no way you can go further down the spinal column, which actually extends to the very end of the horse's tailbone. You can't get there in a way that promotes strength, understanding, and performance. Something in between has to twist, to explain, to compensate. And here's another example I want to share with you, because this was a surprise. Let me see. It was 9 years ago. I had my right knee replaced. So it's now got a bunch of titanium enhancements. And what I learned after that surgery was the biggest challenge I had was not with that knee. It was the fact that the rest of my body had been compensating for rotten knees for over 30 years. And when that knee got fixed and I tried to start using it straight with equal tension on right leg and left leg, my body was screaming in places I never expected, because all of a sudden, the habits that muscles and ligaments and soft tissues had, that they developed as a way to compensate for more than 30 years, didn't like the change. They would have just liked to go back to the way it used to be. What does this mean? I'm not going to go into specifics here, although I will be offering some of that later about exactly what it is in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 that is so important. Here's just one more. When Adam was created, how do you see him in your mind's eye? Was he an infant, a toddler, or a mature man? Most people I speak to, they just have this idea that, he was a grown-up guy. Okay. Then let's take a look at the creation of the earth and evolution. Scientists will tell you that it took millions and billions of years for the planet that we now know to become the planet it is. Okay, that makes sense. That could be logical if that's your point of view. Let's go to Adam. If we take Adam, that mature human being, when he was 10 seconds old, 10 seconds between the time he was inanimate dust, God breathed life to him, and here he is, a mature man. If you took him and trotted him in front of any anthropologist or physician or scientist, they would swear to you that that man was born, was a baby, was a toddler, was a pre-adolescent, was a teenager, and then matured. They would say this man is 20, 30 years old, when in truth, he's but 10 seconds old. If God can create a mature human being, don't you think he can create a mature planet? But that's something for another day. Right now, I just want you to think about the fact that unless we go back to the beginning and be correct from the first step to the second step to the third step, at some point we're going to run into problems. Something's going to hurt, something's going to break, or we're going to have to really twist things to make them work. When it comes to the relationship with the Lord or performance with your horse, please consider going back to the beginning with the horse. Learn about the atlas. Start understanding how your horse's body is supposed to work, and then help them develop that. When it comes to God's word, you and I are responsible to rightly divide it, not to listen to what somebody else says. And you're not even supposed to listen to me. My job is just say, please consider and go back. Who are you going to believe? God or someone else? This is Lynn. I'll see you later.